A retired Navy SEAL thought his old K9 was the only family he had left. Then, on a cold rainy night, a lost German Shepherd puppy appeared outside his door and refused to leave. Daniel tried to shut the world out, but the puppy kept pulling him toward something he had buried for years: the courage to care again. And before that storm passed, one small paw would lead 5 lonely hearts back to the home they thought they had lost. Before we begin, tell us what city you're watching from today, and if stories of loyal dogs, quiet miracles, and second chances touch your heart, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Cold rain swept through Franklin, Tennessee, turning the apartment walkways silver and the maple leaves into dark little boats along the curb. Daniel Carter lived on the second floor of Willow Creek Apartments, where the stairwell lights hummed and every door seemed to hide a private loneliness. At 40, Daniel still carried the shape of war in his body: broad shoulders, weathered hands, a square jaw covered in short brown stubble, and blue-gray eyes that counted corners before they trusted a room. His dark blonde hair was clipped close, his voice came low when he used it, and his face rarely gave strangers more than a nod. People knew he had been Navy. A few guessed more from the way he stepped aside from windows, scanned parking lots, and never let anyone stand behind him for long. Daniel fixed fences and cabinets around town, accepted payment, and left before politeness became conversation. Max was the only soul allowed near the locked rooms inside him. The old German Shepherd, 10 years old and silver around the muzzle, had once worked beside Daniel as a military K9. He was large, black and tan, deep-chested, with one ear slightly crooked and hips that complained on cold mornings. Yet his amber eyes still held the solemn patience of a creature trained to hear danger before men admitted it was there. In Franklin, there were no patrols or whispered commands under foreign stars. There were delivery trucks, children on scooters, neighbors carrying groceries, and plastic bags scraping along fences. Max still treated them all like possible threats. Daniel told himself he was protecting the dog. He checked Max's paws after short walks, dried his coat with military care, measured his food as if preparing for a mission that would never come. But after dinner, when Max lay beneath the window and the apartment settled into obedient silence, Daniel sometimes felt the truth move through him like a draft. Maybe Max was not the one who needed routine most. Maybe Daniel had built his life around the dog because Max was the last witness who never asked what had broken. Across the hall lived Laura Bennett, a 34-year-old waitress at the Magnolia Diner. Laura was tall and slender in the worn-out way of people who spend too many hours on their feet. She had chestnut-brown hair twisted into a loose clip, warm olive skin, tired hazel eyes, and a smile that appeared even when the rest of her face had voted against it. She smelled faintly of coffee, lemon cleaner, and fried onions after late shifts. Laura never pushed Daniel. She said hello, asked about Max when the weather turned sharp, and once left biscuits by his door during a power outage. Daniel had thanked her with a nod so stiff it might have needed oil. That Thursday night near 11, Laura climbed the stairs with aching feet and a coffee stain on her sleeve. The rain followed her in, tapping from her jacket onto the carpet. She was reaching for her keys when she saw something sitting outside Daniel's door. At first, she thought it was a fallen scarf. Then it lifted its head. A German Shepherd puppy, maybe 7 weeks old, sat beneath the hallway light. His black and tan coat was soaked flat against his tiny ribs. His paws looked too big for his body, and one ear stood bravely while the other folded sideways as if still deciding what courage meant. He wore no collar. He was not crying. He simply stared at Daniel's door with the grave certainty of a pilgrim who had crossed a storm and found the shrine. "Hey, little one," Laura whispered, crouching slowly. Inside the apartment, Max rose before Daniel heard anything. The old dog stood rigid, nose pointed toward the crack beneath the door. Daniel felt the change in the air and crossed the room, one hand settling near Max's shoulder. When he opened the door, hallway light spilled across his boots. The puppy looked up at him. Laura held her breath. Max stood half in front of Daniel, not growling, not welcoming, a gate made of fur and memory. Daniel stared down. The old part of him knew what to do with a threat. It did not know what to do with something helpless that had chosen him. His jaw tightened. Then he stepped back and closed the door. The latch clicked. Laura's face fell. The puppy blinked once and remained where he was. For several seconds, the hallway accepted Daniel's answer. Then a drawer opened inside. Footsteps returned. The lock turned again, slower this time. Daniel opened the door wider, an old towel in his hand. He laid it on the floor just inside the apartment. Max did not move forward. He did not move away. The puppy rose, small body trembling, and stepped across the threshold. By morning, the rain had weakened into a gray Tennessee drizzle, and Willow Creek Apartments smelled of wet leaves, old carpet, and coffee drifting from unseen kitchens. Daniel Carter woke before sunrise because old habits did not ask permission. For a moment, everything felt normal. Max breathing near the bedroom door, the refrigerator humming, the pale light pressing against the blinds. Then something sneezed in the kitchen. Daniel sat up. The German shepherd puppy from the hallway was standing on the towel Daniel had left near the cabinets, shaking his small, wet body with heroic determination and sending tiny drops across the lower cupboards. Max stood beside him, stiff as a statue, his silver muzzle pointed down and his amber eyes full of offended dignity. Daniel rubbed one hand over his face. "Temporary," he muttered, though no one in the room looked convinced. The puppy stared up at him with one ear raised and the other folded sideways, his black and tan fur still fluffy despite the bath towel's defeat. He looked too young to understand abandonment, yet old enough to recognize warmth when he found it. Daniel gave him water in a shallow cereal bowl and found a little plain chicken from the refrigerator. He told himself it was not care, only common sense. 15 minutes later, Laura Bennett knocked softly and stepped in holding 2 paper cups of coffee from the Magnolia Diner. Her chestnut hair was still pinned back from the night before, her hazel eyes shadowed with lack of sleep, and her thin diner jacket hung from her shoulders as if it had carried too many winters. She looked at the puppy, then at the cereal bowl, then at Daniel's boots placed carefully away from small teeth. "So," she said, "I see you're not keeping him." Daniel took the coffee without smiling. "Exactly." The puppy chose that moment to grab one of Daniel's gray socks from beside the laundry basket and drag it across the floor like a flag stolen from a fallen kingdom. Laura pressed her lips together. Max watched the theft with the grim expression of an old commander witnessing the collapse of discipline. "He needs a name until we find where he came from," Laura said. Daniel's answer came too quickly. "No names." The puppy tripped over the sock, rolled onto his side, sprang back up and looked proud of the entire operation. Laura tilted her head. "Charlie." Daniel frowned. "You named him anyway." "Temporarily. That's how people get in trouble." Laura's smile softened, but there was tiredness beneath it. The Magnolia Diner had recently changed managers, and the new man, Keith Harlan, a narrow-faced man in his 50s with slick black hair, pale skin, and the cheerful cruelty of someone who called every cutback an improvement, had started trimming hours. Laura had not said much about it, but Daniel noticed things. He noticed the extra shift written on her wrist in blue ink. He noticed how she counted coins for laundry. He noticed how she smiled before anyone could ask if she was all right. Charlie spent the morning testing the laws of Daniel's apartment. He chewed the corner of an old cardboard box, barked once at his reflection in the oven door, and tried to climb onto the couch with the confidence of a mountaineer and the skill of a potato. His front paws reached the cushion, his back legs scrambled against the rug, and then he slid down slowly until he landed on his rear. He sat there, startled by gravity. Laura laughed first. Daniel almost did. Almost. Max did not laugh, but when Charlie waddled too close to an open electrical cord near Daniel's toolbox, the old K9 moved forward and nudged the puppy away with his shoulder. Daniel saw it. He looked down at the toolbox instead. By afternoon, Daniel had gone to the small pet aisle at Franklin Hardware under the excuse of buying screws. He returned with a puppy bowl, soft food, and a rubber chew toy shaped like a bone. Laura raised one eyebrow when she saw the bag. Daniel set it on the counter. Cheaper than replacing furniture. Of course, she said. Very tactical. The day settled into strange warmth. Charlie ate, slept, woke, caused damage, and slept again. Max kept his distance, but less with every hour. When thunder rolled across Franklin after sunset, Charlie froze beneath the kitchen chair, his small body trembling, ears pinned low. Daniel stepped forward, but Max reached him first. The old German shepherd lowered himself beside the puppy, not touching him, not crowding him, simply becoming a wall between Charlie and the storm. Slowly, Charlie's tail stopped shaking. Daniel stood in the doorway, feeling something open in him that he had spent years keeping locked. Later, while Laura rinsed the puppy bowl and the rain tapped softly against the window, Charlie wandered to the old navy jacket Daniel kept folded near the bookshelf. It was faded, heavy, and carried the ghosts of sand, sweat, rain, and silence. Charlie sniffed it twice, turned in a crooked circle, and curled up on one sleeve. Daniel's chest tightened. Max lifted his head. For one painful second, Daniel thought the old dog would claim it back. Instead, Max rose, crossed the room, and gently pushed Charlie's slipping body farther onto the jacket with his muzzle. The puppy sighed in his sleep. Daniel looked away before Laura could see his face. The apartment had not been this full in years, and that frightened him more than the emptiness ever had. The next morning, Franklin woke under a low ceiling of rain, the kind that made the whole town look tired before breakfast. Daniel stood in his kitchen with Charlie asleep on the old navy jacket and Max lying beside the bookshelf, pretending not to watch the puppy's every breath. The apartment smelled faintly of wet fur, coffee, and the soft food Daniel had sworn he only bought because replacing furniture was expensive. Still, the sight of that small body curled on his jacket made something tighten in him. Charlie had been there barely 2 days, yet already the room had changed shape around him. The towel near the cabinets, the little bowl beside Max's dish, the rubber toy under the coffee table, small things, harmless things, dangerous things. Daniel knew how fast a temporary thing could become a promise if a man let himself look at it too long. He told himself Max needed quiet. Max was old. Max's hips hurt in the cold. Max had earned peace, not a 7-week-old puppy climbing over his paws like a drunk recruit at roll call. That explanation sounded reasonable enough for Daniel to carry across the hall. Laura opened her door in sweatpants and an oversized diner sweatshirt, her chestnut hair loose over one shoulder, her hazel eyes still heavy from too little sleep. Her apartment was smaller than Daniel's, warmer in a softer way, with a crocheted blanket on the couch, 2 chipped mugs beside the sink, a stack of library books near the window, and a little lamp that made the rain outside look less cruel. Daniel held Charlie against his chest with the careful stiffness of a man handing over a problem before it learned his heartbeat. "He should stay here for a few days," he said. Laura looked at Charlie, then passed Daniel to Max standing in the open doorway across the hall. Max's ears were forward, his body still, his eyes fixed on the puppy. "A few days," Laura repeated. Daniel nodded. "You're better with small things." Laura's face softened, not with victory, but with understanding. She saw the fear hiding inside his logic. She saw the way he did not look down at Charlie when the puppy yawned against his jacket. "All right," she said quietly. She took Charlie into her arms, and the puppy licked her chin as if every transfer of ownership in the world should include optimism. Daniel turned back before Laura could say anything else. By noon, his apartment was orderly again. The puppy bowl was washed and placed upside down by the sink. The towel was folded. The rubber toy was shoved into a drawer. No tiny paws slipped on the kitchen floor. No ridiculous sneeze interrupted the silence. Everything was exactly where it belonged, and somehow the apartment felt less like a home than it had yesterday. Max lay near the door instead of under the window. When footsteps crossed the hall, his head lifted. Once, Daniel found him standing over the folded towel, breathing in Charlie's scent with the embarrassed dignity of an old soldier caught missing something he had never approved of. "He's fine," Daniel said. Max looked at him. It was an unfair look, calm and ancient, as if the dog had heard better lies in worse places. Daniel reached for the doorknob twice that evening and stopped both times. Laura had a gentler voice. She laughed easier. Her apartment had blankets and warm lamps, not ghosts folded into old jackets. Charlie would be better there. That sentence carried him until Friday. Then Keith Harlan changed Laura's schedule again. The Magnolia Diner had filled with football fans, wet jackets, and people who treated coffee refills like acts of national rescue. Laura had planned to be gone 6 hours. She left Charlie with water, soft food, a blanket from the couch, and one of Daniel's old socks the puppy had stolen before the move. "I'll be back soon," she told him, kneeling to scratch behind his uneven ears. But soon became late, and late became nearly 10 hours. Rain hammered the windows of the diner while Laura moved from booth to booth, smiling with her mouth while worry pulled at her eyes. When she finally climbed the apartment stairs close to midnight, her shoes were soaked, her back ached, and the coins in her apron pocket felt heavier than they were worth. She opened her door, whispering Charlie's name. No pause came running. The puppy lay on the blanket beside the couch, awake, but strangely still. His food was barely touched. His water bowl was too full. His tail moved once when he saw her, but his head sank back down as if even happiness had become heavy. Laura's breath caught. She touched his side, felt him breathing, and guilt rushed through her so sharply she almost cried. 30 seconds later, she was across the hall. Daniel opened the door before she knocked twice. One look at her face changed him. Max slipped past Daniel into the hallway, moving with a purpose he had not shown since the old world. "What happened?" Daniel asked. "I don't know," Laura whispered. "He won't really get up." Max entered Laura's apartment first. He lowered his silver muzzle to Charlie, breathed in slowly, then looked back at Daniel. In that single, steady stare, Daniel understood what he had tried not to know. This was not about quiet. This was not about temporary. A small life had crossed his doorway, and now it needed somewhere to belong. Rain blurred the streets of Franklin into ribbons of amber light as Daniel drove through the wet midnight with Charlie wrapped in Laura's blanket. Laura sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting near the puppy's small ribs, counting each breath as if numbers could keep fear away. Her diner uniform was still damp at the cuffs, her chestnut hair slipping loose around her tired face, and guilt had made her quiet in a way Daniel did not know how to comfort. Max rode in the back seat, upright and silent, his silver muzzle pointed between them, his old body steady as a sentry returning to duty. The emergency veterinary clinic on Fairview Pike glowed at the end of a small strip mall, its sign buzzing blue-white above rain-dark windows. Inside, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant, wet dog, and burned coffee. A young veterinary technician named Molly Reyes hurried from behind the desk. She was short and round-faced, with warm brown skin, black hair tucked into a messy bun, and gentle hands that moved quickly without making frightened animals more afraid. "Let's take a look at him," she said, and Daniel noticed that she spoke to Charlie first, not to the humans, which made him trust her a little more than he wanted to. Charlie lifted his head when Molly touched him, then let it sink back into the blanket. Laura's lips trembled. "I left him too long," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, then at the puppy. "You brought him here," he said. It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was the nearest thing he had available. A few minutes later, Dr. Amelia Grant came into the exam room, a woman in her late 40s with silver-threaded black hair cut at her jaw, pale skin, sharp green eyes, and the calm posture of someone who had learned long ago that panic never healed anything. She wore navy scrubs, scuffed sneakers, and a thin gold wedding band on a chain around her neck. Her voice was low, practical, and kind without becoming soft. She checked Charlie's gums, listened to his heart, pressed gently along his belly, and asked questions while Molly prepared fluids. Daniel answered in short pieces. Laura filled in what he left out. Max stood near Daniel's leg, watching every movement, not threatening, just recording. Dr. Grant finally straightened. "He is not in serious danger," she said, and Laura covered her mouth with both hands. "He is mildly dehydrated and exhausted. I think the bigger issue is stress. He has changed places too quickly, and puppies this young do not understand temporary arrangements. Food and warmth matter, but stability matters too." The word landed harder than Daniel expected. Stability, not a command, not a supply list, not a towel on the kitchen floor, something deeper. Charlie received fluids beneath a warming blanket printed with little paw marks. He looked absurdly small under it, like a soldier decorated by a children's kingdom. Max lowered himself beside the exam table and did not take his eyes off him. When Charlie finally gave a weak little lick toward Daniel's wrist, Daniel felt the pressure inside his chest loosen and hurt at the same time. They were preparing to leave near dawn when Molly paused over the paperwork. "Was he scanned for a microchip?" Daniel looked at Laura. Laura shook her head. Dr. Grant nodded once. "Let's check. If someone is missing him, they may be worried sick." The scanner passed over Charlie's shoulders and beeped. Laura went still. Daniel did not move at all. Molly typed the number into the clinic computer, her brow tightening as the screen loaded. "Registered owner," she said carefully. "Helen Whitaker. Address is less than a mile from Willow Creek Apartments." Morning had not fully arrived when they pulled up to a small white house on a quiet street lined with wet maples. A wooden fence bordered the yard, one back panel leaning badly, and yellow chrysanthemums sagged in clay pots beside the porch. A wind chime tapped weakly in the rain. Helen Whitaker opened the door after Laura called from the driveway. She was 76, small and slightly stooped, with soft white hair pinned unevenly at the back, fair skin lined by grief, and blue eyes reddened by several nights without sleep. Her pale cardigan was buttoned wrong at the top, and one hand stayed on the doorframe as if the house itself had to hold her upright. Then she saw Charlie. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. Charlie wriggled in Laura's arms, and when Laura set him down, he trotted clumsily to Helen. The old woman sank to her knees and gathered him close, trembling as though she had been handed back a living ember from a cold fireplace. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon, old wood, and loneliness. Photographs lined the mantel. Helen, beside a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, white hair, sun-browned skin, and a farmer's patient smile. "That was George," Helen said, touching Charlie's back. "My husband. 55 years. He passed 3 weeks ago." Her voice bent, but did not break. A friend from the senior center had taken her to adopt the puppy because the house had become too quiet. She had not named him yet. Every name felt like opening a new room before she had finished saying goodbye to the old one. On the rainy evening, he vanished. The loose latch on the back gate had failed. Daniel glanced toward the fence and understood the journey at once. When he finally stood to leave, Charlie followed him to the door and caught the cuff of his jeans between tiny teeth. Helen softly called, "Charlie?" The puppy turned his head toward her, tail moving, but he did not let go. No one spoke. In that silence, Daniel understood that this was no longer a question of who owned the puppy. Charlie had walked through rain to tie two lonely houses together. Morning came to Franklin with a pale, gray softness, the rain finally thinning into mist over Helen Whitaker's little white house. Daniel stood near the front door with Charlie's tiny teeth still holding the cuff of his jeans, while Helen sat at the kitchen table as if the night had aged her another year and returned one small piece of her soul at the same time. The house felt different now that Charlie was inside it. Not joyful yet, not healed, but less abandoned. The puppy wandered between Daniel's boots and Helen's slippers, confused by the invisible thread he had tied between them. Laura watched quietly from beside the sink, her diner jacket damp at the shoulders, her tired hazel eyes soft with the kind of understanding Daniel found dangerous because it asked nothing and still saw too much. Max stood near Daniel's leg, old and steady, his silver muzzle lifted toward Helen as if he could smell grief the way he once smelled danger. Helen poured coffee no one drank and told them about Autumn Companion Week at the Franklin Senior Center. It was supposed to start that Monday. Slow morning walks through Harlow Park, a reading hour at the public library, a small charity market, and a picnic at the end of the week beneath the maples behind the center. George had always hated organized activities, she said with a faint smile, but he had gone anyway because she liked them. He would sit in the back and pretend not to enjoy himself, she said, looking toward the mantel where George's photograph watched the room with kind eyes. She had planned to bring Charlie, but after the clinic, after seeing how small he looked beneath the warming blanket, she could not bear the thought of crowds, bicycles, music, and larger dogs pressing around him. Then her gaze moved to Max. Helen folded both hands around her mug, and Daniel noticed how they trembled. "I would never ask to borrow him like he is a thing," she said carefully. "But if Max could stay with me for that week, I think I could go. I think I could walk into those rooms without feeling quite so alone." Daniel's answer rose in him like a door slamming. No, Max was not a comfort object passed between sad people. Max was his partner, the last breathing witness to the years Daniel could not explain to anyone else. Max had slept by his door when nightmares came like weather. Max had stood between him and the world when Daniel no longer knew how to stand there himself. Daniel opened his mouth, but before the word escaped, Max moved. The old German shepherd crossed the kitchen with slow, deliberate steps and stopped beside Helen's chair. He lowered his head beneath her shaking hand. Helen froze. Then her fingers settled between his ears, fragile at first, then grateful. Daniel stared at the dog, feeling both betrayed and understood. Max had chosen many things in his life before Daniel spoke. This, apparently, was another mission. Monday morning, Daniel left Max at Helen's house with his leash, food, bed, and too many instructions. Helen listened solemnly. Max ignored all of them with professional confidence. At Harlow Park, he walked beside her at a pace so slow it seemed he had measured every step against the beat of her heart. The senior center group noticed him before they noticed Helen's new smile. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, an 81-year-old retired schoolteacher with silver curls, peach-colored skin, round glasses, and a voice that could still silence a room of imaginary third-graders, declared Max a gentleman in a fur coat. Mr. Arthur Pike, a thin old veteran with dark weathered skin, a white mustache, and a faded army cap, gave Max a solemn nod as if recognizing rank. During reading hour at the library, Max lay beneath Helen's chair while a volunteer read from a book about Tennessee trails. Helen's hand rested on his back the entire time. By Wednesday, people stopped asking if she was all right and started asking where Max preferred to sit. At the charity market, he stood beside her table while she sold apple bread, embroidered towels, and 2 jars of peach preserves she insisted were not as good as George's, though everyone bought them anyway. Helen laughed more that day, not loudly, not freely yet, but the sound appeared small and startled, like a bird returning to a branch after a storm. That afternoon, as the group crossed the edge of the park, an electric bike came fast around the wet path, its young rider looking down at his phone. Helen stepped back, her shoe slipping on the slick leaves. Max moved before anyone shouted. He placed his body in front of her, planted his paws, and gave one low, steady bark. The bike swerved and stopped. The boy, pale and embarrassed under a red hoodie, stammered an apology. Max did not chase him. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood there until Helen's breathing steadied. Her hand lowered onto his back. In that quiet pressure of fur beneath her palm, Helen understood that protection did not always belong to war. Sometimes it was only one faithful creature standing still when the world moved too fast. The first evening without Max settled over Willow Creek Apartments like a coat Daniel had forgotten how to wear. Outside, Franklin glowed under wet streetlights, the rain finally gone, but still hanging in the air as a cold silver mist. Inside the apartment, Charlie chased a rubber bone across the kitchen floor, slid into the leg of a chair, and looked personally betrayed by furniture. Daniel should have laughed. Instead, he looked toward the empty space beside the door where Max usually slept. The old German Shepherd's bed was still there, the blanket pressed into the shape of his heavy body, but the room no longer had that steady breathing Daniel had trusted for years. Charlie waddled over and dropped the toy on Daniel's boot, proud and expectant. "You're not him," Daniel said quietly. Charlie wagged as if that was a compliment. All week, Daniel learned how much sound one old dog had made by being still. He missed Max's nails tapping once before bed, missed the low sigh from beneath the window, missed the way Max checked the door as if the world still needed guarding. For years, Daniel had believed Max needed him because old soldiers needed someone to remind them they still mattered. But without Max beside him, Daniel felt the truth rising like water under a locked door. He had kept Max close because Max understood silence. Max never asked why Daniel woke before dawn, or why he kept his back to walls in restaurants, or why some nights he sat fully dressed on the edge of the bed until morning. Max let him survive without explaining survival. Charlie did not understand any of that. Charlie only understood hunger, sleep, socks, and the sacred mission of putting his nose into Daniel's toolbox. That made him harder to hide from. Laura came over after her shifts to help with feeding and cleanup, though she looked thinner each night. She was still tall and slender, still soft-spoken, still carrying that warm, hazel-eyed kindness that made strangers ask for more coffee just to keep her near the table a little longer. But the brightness around her had begun to dim. The Magnolia Diner's new manager, Keith Harlan, had finally done what his clipped smiles had promised. On Thursday afternoon, Laura stood outside the diner holding a cardboard box with her folded apron, 2 chipped mugs, a name tag, and 8 years of routine packed like leftovers nobody wanted. Her chestnut hair had fallen loose from its clip, her olive skin looked pale from shock, and she kept smiling because crying in a parking lot felt, to her, like making trouble for the pavement. Daniel saw her later at Helen's house. He had gone there to adjust the loose back gate, while Max lay in the shade beside Helen's porch steps and Charlie attacked a fallen maple leaf with unnecessary courage. Helen watched Laura rinse soup bowls in the kitchen, watched Daniel pretend to focus on a hinge that had been fixed 10 minutes earlier, and finally spoke from her rocking chair. "That girl has opened doors for people her whole life," Helen said. Her small, white-haired figure looked fragile beneath George's old quilt, but her blue eyes had grown clearer since Max came to stay. Daniel tightened a screw that did not need tightening. "Laura? Who else would I be talking about?" Helen gave him a look sharp enough to cut through marine-grade steel. She carried plates to tired men, lonely women, crying children, old folks who stayed too long because home was empty. She made room for everyone. I wonder how often anyone made room for her. Daniel said nothing. Helen nodded, as if silence had signed a confession. That night, Laura came to Daniel's door holding a plastic container of soup Helen had insisted he take home. She wore jeans, an old gray sweater, and the brave, exhausted expression of someone trying to fold fear small enough to fit in her pocket. Max was still at Helen's, so only Charlie sat at Daniel's boot, chewing the edge of his shoelace like a tiny criminal with excellent timing. Daniel took the container, then looked past Laura toward the hallway where a lonely puppy had once waited in the rain. His throat tightened. "The spare room's empty," he said. Laura blinked. Daniel looked at the floor, then forced himself to continue. "If you need a place until things settle, no pressure, just, it's there." The words were plain, awkward, and badly sanded at the edges, but Laura's eyes filled as if he had handed her a key to a kingdom. By Sunday afternoon, the rain had finally left Franklin, and Helen Whitaker's backyard shone beneath a clear autumn sky washed gold by the sinking sun. 2 old maple trees stood behind the house like gentle guardians, their yellow leaves drifting down over folding chairs, plaid tablecloths, paper cups, and a long picnic table crowded with apple bread, peach preserves, lemonade, and more casseroles than any gathering of elderly Tennesseans could legally need. Helen moved slowly between guests in a pale blue cardigan, her white hair pinned neatly this time, her small frame still fragile but no longer folded inward by grief. Max stood beside her porch steps, his black and tan body calm, silver muzzle lifted, dark blue leash loose in her hand. He did not look like a borrowed dog. He looked like an old knight who had spent the week guarding a queen and had found the kingdom worth saving. Then Daniel came through the side gate with Laura beside him and Charlie in his arms. Daniel wore a clean dark work shirt, jeans, and boots still marked by old repairs. His square jaw was freshly shaved except for a shadow of brown stubble, and his blue-gray eyes searched the yard out of habit before softening on Max. Laura stood near the gate in a simple green dress beneath her worn denim jacket, chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, hazel eyes bright with a nervous hope she had not yet learned to trust. Charlie saw Helen first. His uneven ears lifted. His paws kicked against Daniel's arm, and the moment Daniel set him down, the puppy launched himself across the grass with all the grace of a sack of potatoes, blessed by thunder. Laughter moved through the yard. Charlie tumbled against Helen's ankles, grabbed the edge of George's blue wool scarf from her chair, and dragged it 2 heroic inches before collapsing on it, deeply satisfied. Helen pressed a hand to her mouth, half laughing, half crying. Then Max saw Daniel. The old German shepherd did not run. He walked with slow, measured steps, like a soldier returning from a mission completed well. Daniel knelt before Max reached him, and when the dog placed his silver head into Daniel's hands, the whole yard seemed to grow quiet without being asked. Daniel bowed his forehead to Max's muzzle. He had thought letting Max go for a week would take something from him. Instead, it had returned Max with a new kind of peace, and returned Daniel with a wound finally ready to close. Near the porch, Charlie curled against Helen's slippers with George's scarf beneath one paw. Daniel saw it then. Charlie belonged with Helen, but that did not mean Charlie was lost to him. Max belonged with Daniel, but that did not mean his purpose ended at Daniel's door. Laura watched them all from beside the gate, one hand tucked into the pocket of her denim jacket, as if afraid the picture might disappear if she stepped too far inside it. Daniel turned and looked at her. For once, he did not look away first. After that day, life did not become perfect. It became lived. Max returned to Willow Creek Apartments, where he slept beside Daniel's door and still checked the hallway before bed. Twice a week, Daniel drove him to Helen's house, and Max stepped out of the truck with the grave importance of a working dog reporting for duty. Charlie grew into his paws and Helen's care, though not into his manners. He stole socks, carried George's blue scarf from room to room, and greeted Max as if every visit were a parade arranged in his honor. Daniel repaired Helen's back gate, then the porch step, then the loose kitchen cabinet, then the porch light that flickered whenever the wind came up. Laura found work at a small bakery near Main Street, and slowly, without speeches or promises too large to carry, the spare room in Daniel's apartment stopped feeling temporary. A year later, Helen's backyard filled again beneath string lights and maple leaves. This time, the folding chairs faced a small flower arch. Daniel stood at the front with Max beside him wearing a dark blue bow, dignified enough to make several elderly women whisper. Charlie wore a cream-colored bow that had already slipped sideways, and when he trotted down the aisle carrying a small flower basket, he nearly dragged it into the lemonade table. Everyone laughed, including Daniel. Then Laura appeared with autumn light in her chestnut hair, and Daniel forgot every word of the short vow he had practiced. He said the true ones instead. Under the lights, with Helen crying while insisting she was not, Max resting at Daniel's feet, Charlie's head in Helen's lap, and George's blue scarf folded over the porch chair, one open door had become a home large enough for all of them. What stays with us is not only the wedding beneath the maple trees, but the quiet miracle that began with one cold, rainy door. Sometimes God's grace does not arrive with thunder or bright skies. Sometimes it comes as a lost puppy, an old dog finding purpose again, a widow learning to laugh, or a tired neighbor finally being offered a place to rest. In daily life, we may pass by small blessings because they look too ordinary. A bowl set out, a hand extended, a door opened at the right time. But those little mercies can become the bridge back home. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us if a pet, a neighbor, or a small miracle ever helped you through a lonely season. Please like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. May God bless you and everyone watching tonight.